Hello, this is Hugh Massey again from DNA Behaviour. Today, I'm going to walk you through the Business DNA Leadership 360 discovery. I'm going to show you the DNA Leadership Performance Report for Chris Coddington. Now, at the outset, the difference here is in all of our other reports for Business DNA, they focus on natural behavior discovery. They are looking at your natural hardwired behavior, your instinctive behavior, your core talents. But in terms of performance, it is also important to remember, how do you actually show up and perform? How are you using those talents that you have, those natural talents that you have? What is your impact on others? What are your learned behaviors? So the Business DNA Leadership 360 discovery process is intended to elicit out how you are actually showing up and performing. And that is measured by your own perception of yourself in terms of how you're performing, and that of others, whether it's your manager, key stakeholders in the business, peers, and subordinates in your team. So this is a bringing together of how you are actually performing. So it's important insight for development. And I would say at the beginning here, one of the key areas to be looking for is, where is there a difference between your perception of how you're performing and how others think you're performing? And then just generally speaking, how much performance gap is there that you need to grow in? The Leadership 360 discovery should be embraced as a great performance development tool. Some of the feedback can sting at times. And I know when I did my own, or had my own done on me 10 or so years ago, when we first started with this, it was a little bit scary getting it back. And that's because there were some areas that I was evaluated on that I thought I was better at than I was. It was a complete blind spot for me. But that's true for everybody. But each year that I've gone through a Business DNA 360 discovery, the results have got better because I've worked on those areas. I'm not perfect, even though I am the leader of DNA behavior and I know a lot about behavior. I'm still a human being too. We've all got room for development. And I think if you come into this with that mindset, then there'll be a positive experience. One of the big differences also in our process versus others out there is that we like you to go through the Business DNA natural behavior discovery first, so that you get a handle on what your core strengths and struggles are, that they're highly predictive. And as you know from previous sessions, very accurate. So that's the core starting place of who you are. So I think we believe that's important to have that feedback first, and then see how you're actually performing. Whereas if you just get a performance rating first, but you don't really know why, I think that's more difficult to handle. So again, we want to put you in a positive place to get very specific coaching to develop to be the best of who you can be. And that's what the intention of what this report is. So at the outset, this is the summary. We cover 7 core areas, which are listed here, that are important for leadership. And there are 75 rating items across these areas, basically 10 for each, and then there's 15 for one area. And we'll see that come out specifically in the report. And so what we're showing here is your own assessment of who you are. So this is how of your performance, I should say, and that's how this is how Chris Coddington has evaluated his own performance, and then this is what everybody else has said in a summary format. And the two areas here for the greater level of development are here. The weaker areas that are there. So for him, it's around communication and relationship building. They're highlighted in red. You can also see it graphically here. In an overall format, Chris's perception of his own performance versus how others have rated him is overall fairly close. There's not a lot of overall big blind spots on an overall basis, but once we get specifically into the report, you'll see a few areas that he nevertheless needs to work on. And all there needs to be is a couple of areas. In fact, what you want to see for a leader is these darkened light green lines being fairly close to each other. That's a good foundation, because when there's a big gap, that's probably spelling more of a problem. So Chris is reasonably aligned here with himself. His own perception of his performance is probably pretty realistic, and then that's coming up against what others have said about it. Then something else that we do is we've built into our 360 process what we call the Sustainable Performance Index. So what we're looking at is an overall performance rating. So for Chris, it's 82%, which is pretty strong. You want to get up into that 80% area and higher, but there's still a performance gap there. So he's really got some areas to still improve on. And this has been built out of understanding, a whole range of areas in relation to his performance, and using a formula that we've built, and I'll go through that during this feedback session. Also here in section 2 is the leadership performance planning area. So this is where we have highlighted Chris's top 10 leadership performance strengths. And this is based on the feedback from others. So this is his 10 strongest areas. So we've pulled from the 75 rating items, the 10 areas where he's the strongest. So he's getting ratings over 6, which is good. There, ideally he'd like to be getting those up to 7s, but this is a good start. And then here's the struggle areas. So here's the 10 areas where there's the greatest performance development opportunities for Chris, and this is where his scores are more in the 5 area. So still reasonably good, but there's developmental opportunities there when you take it that the highest score is 7. And then in this area here is where we blend the areas that Chris needs to work on the most. So they are around effective communication and relationship building. So they're going to be where he's going to have to set goals for himself with his coach or his leader to do better. And then you've got to look at his natural behavior. So how's he going to do that within his inherent strengths and struggles? And I think this is a key unique part of our reporting. So for Chris, he is naturally a pioneer, which does mean that he'll have a bit more trouble with communication and relationship building. So it would be expected that would be an area for him to need to work in. So we identify what his strengths and struggles are, what's a coaching question, and then we look at the same for the next strongest strength that he has around being skeptical. So this helps build the personal development plan, because you've got to, if you're going to develop, you've got to do it from your strengths. That's a strengths-focused approach. So that's how we do this for everybody. One of the things that we do in our system is, given that this report is quite detailed, there's a lot of information, it's possible to have it prepared in a summary format. So that would be the areas that I've just shown you now, finishing here. So just those first 4 pages. So sometimes what the facilitator does is sends the participant just the first 4 pages to start with, and then they go through the detail together afterwards. But it's really just a matter of how much information do you want people to see in the first go around, just to manage information flows. So Appendix A, we talk about the Leadership Sustainable Performance Index and how it's built up. So there's quite a detailed explanation here. But at a high level, what we're doing here is that in terms of the numerator, the performance pathway is really looking at your direction as a leader. Have you got purpose, your values, your passions, and some of your skills and proficiency? So that's really your direction. Are you on in a way, are you on the right path? So that's important. What we know from research is that in terms of growth as a leader, a lot of it's going to come from how you emotionally engage others. So your communication and relationship building skills are very important. If you don't connect to people, you're not going to grow. And so that, and if you can't emotionally engage with them, just connect with them at a deeper personal level, you're not going to grow. So that's important to recognize there as part of the numerator. And then the denominator, which is really about the sustainability of that growth, comes from, do you have confidence? So based on our research, we think confidence is very, very important to growth. If you lose your confidence, almost everything else is going to fall apart. There's some level of there being a vicious cycle here. If you're more confident, you're probably going to emotionally engage people more easily. It's just going to be something that happens in your walk. Your confidence goes down, your engagement of others goes down, and to some degree, your performance pathway goes down. If you build your performance pathway up and your emotional engagement up, your confidence goes up too. So they're all working together, but confidence is very important. That's why we've got it on the denominator, and your wisdom. And the wisdom is, in a nutshell, is around your values, around your character, trusting people. If your ability to make wise decisions falls apart, then everything else will fall apart, because in a way you're going to do something, possibly do something destructive to your leadership. And we've all seen people that are performing at very high levels do well for a season, and then things fall apart. And that is often because they've lost their wisdom. They've got ahead of themselves in some area. They've got broken in terms of their values somewhere, and things start to spiral downwards. And then their confidence goes and everything else goes. So that's why this formula is important. I realize it's complex, but understanding this as a leader is important to your growth, and importantly to sustaining the growth. It's all explained here in that table. And then now we specifically get into each of the 7 core areas. We're looking at how you're performing in each area. So it's laid out in this table here. So you can see for leadership proficiency, here's the 10 items. And there's a rating out of 7. So the person being evaluated would evaluate themselves. That's their self-assessment. Then there's the scoring of others. Then there's the self-perception. So how do you see yourself against how others see you? And you want to, in the ideal world, you want to get this within 1 point. So for example, here, operating in a mature way, Chris was evaluated himself 6. Others have said 5.2. There's a 0.8 gap. That's okay. That gap's within range. Ideally, it's the same, like this one here. And then the strengths development opportunity is how far has Chris got to grow? So that's going to be the difference between 7 and B here in terms of what others perceive him to, needing to do. So he's got 1.8. Again, we want to get that down to 1. That's coaching. It's going to come with coaching. The items that I focus on the most are where this one is more than 2. That's going to be so that's a big strengths development opportunity. I'd be looking for those. at the end of the day, you can't coach the person on everything, on all 75 items. You want to pick the ones that are the biggest gaps. But usually there's a theme to it. And I found, just personally with mine, it was really around, in some areas it was around how I built relationships in the office, were a bit weaker in terms of making it fun, celebrating successes, recognizing that someone had performed well, making them feel good about that, being approachable. So there were areas that I had. There's a theme to that because I'm a more results-driven leader. I can forget those areas, and I was just blind to it. So that's where I, alluded to at the start of this session. I had a problem, and I had to work on it. And at the end of the day, this is a journey to bring every area up to being closer to the 7, as close as you can get. And at the top here is where we provide the summary. So overall, Chris is doing pretty well. His self-perception gap is only 0.4 overall. That's not bad. And the self-development opportunity is 1.3. That could be, ideally, you'd rather that under 1 on an overall basis. So you do that for all, we do this analysis for all of the 7 areas. And there's some areas here, let's spot those for Chris, but also what's important in this report, whilst there's objective measurement, the subjective comments are also important to see how, what others are actually saying. That this can provide more feedback than anything else. Using these reports should not be a witch hunt. They should not be used to fire somebody. We don't want a negative culture created in a business where a 360 turns up to suddenly oust somebody out of a business. That is not healthy. Everyone would know that's going on. It's better. It's an equal process. All leaders are going through this. Senior managers, and it's used as a coaching and development process and something that's celebrated. One of the points I haven't made yet is, though, that for the participant, when they get this, that they should go through it. Yes, there will, as I said earlier, there will be some areas that sting. Take them on board, think about it, reflect. But when you next see the team in a team meeting, thank everybody for the feedback, for their time invested in completing this for you and investing time in your development. That's important. And also recognize that, okay, here are some of the strengths that came out. That's clear. Here's some struggle areas, and I'm going to work on it. Face the team. That's the best thing you can do. And if you're not comfortable to do that in the first go around, at least get prepared with your coach or your facilitator to do that. That's very important that you go through that process. In a way, facing this is part of the healing and the development process. And then it shows everybody in the team that you recognize it. They're going to then work with you. This is not working against you as well. So, I'm trying to give you the positive points here to using this successfully, because it can be extremely powerful if done right. So let's look for an area for Chris where there might be more of a development opportunity needed. So here, checks to see that tasks are properly completed. He's rated himself 4. Others think that he is doing that very well, in fact. So that's a negative performance gap. So we need to, in the coaching, you need to explore with Chris why he thinks he's not so good at that. It may well be that he's doing it too much. But this could be a blind spot. So that's a discussion point there. And then we can go through and we might see another discussion point. So here's an area here, adapts communication for people, situations. So he says he's 5, others say he's 5. So there's no self-perception gap here, but he still needs to develop more, needs to step up more as a leader and communicate more. So that could become up to a 2. So you can see that there are areas here, quite a lot of areas here where there's gaps of more than one, quite a high level, more than 1. We really want to focus on, though, for Chris, where the few that are over 2. And so here they come in relationship building, here demonstrating understanding for others' concerns. That would be an area. Celebrating successes. he's a little bit lower there than what the team, he rates himself lower on that than what the team does, but he's still got a developmental opportunity there. So we do this analysis for each of the items through the report. So you go through the report. So I'm not going to dwell on each one here. So I think you've got the idea of what's going on. And then at the back here, we can look at the summary of how each person or each category of person has evaluated Chris in the team. And this can provide more insights as well, because sometimes a manager will evaluate a teammate or a subordinate in the team differently to how the peers see that person. And so it's good to get those gaps as well and mine into that a little bit, so that you see more from all of those dimensions. And so that's at the back here of the report. So this is important feedback to have as well. And that's done for all of the 75 items.